Dr. Adru.
Good evening. So we're looking for Flo.
Yes, yeah.
She hasn't replied me. We'll wait about 5-10 minutes and then we can, if she doesn't come, we'll go.
Alright. Okay, she has joined in.
Okay, wonderful.
Hello, good evening. Sorry I'm late.
Hi. Thank you, Flo. Sorry,
No
Lola.
problem. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm tired, but let's do this and get out.
Hello, my love.
Tired.
How's that doing? There's that doing. Hello, my baby. I'm telling you, I'm tired. I just had a meeting with FAN as well.
Oh, God.
Whoa, Nigerian government officials can talk.
They like talking now.
They love talking.
Okay, this is going to
Sorry, go ahead. Over to you.
because
Let me find the email you sent me.
I just want to say this is going to be short. It's basically just to record, like, because basically we can't record. You know, people ask for the recordings, but because of confidentiality and all of that, I don't want people to feel like what they're saying is being played out,
Monitored or being used, and then they won't feel comfortable talking freely.
Exactly. And also it's kind of concerning if you're listening to like 12 people like speaking as a podcast. So what we do is after the main conversation, we just have like a 20-minute conversation with the conversation leader. How many times can you use conversation in a sentence?
Adam's going for broke.
But we just have like a short conversation later just to say basically the questions are sent to you, and that is then what we share as a recording, so that is then based on the person. Whoever wants to listen can listen and comment on that. So yeah, that's it. So it's really like 20 to 30 minutes. Not, I mean, you can take longer, but we try and keep it to that so that it's really short and punchy. Yeah.
Good, because I really need a shower.
No, even I literally just got in like a few minutes ago, so I was hoping I wasn't going to be late. I was like, let me just do this first before I do anything else. Otherwise, the day
Exactly. And I'm sorry if the time is a little bit inconvenient, but literally today was just, this week is just a bit jam-packed. I'm glad that you guys were able to work around my crazy scheduling.
No, this is fine. It's even good because at the end of the day, it's better for me to, but not only that, even if you told me 11 p.m., you're giving us Saturday for free. They are giving us, we can't demand anything, no. Whatever it offers. Okay, cool. Let me start. So I've sent you what I'm going to start. So it's recorded. I'm just going to read this spiel. Please bear with me while I read the spiel. We don't have to read it all the time, but I think the guy likes to have different recordings of the same sentence. So, hello and welcome to the Sahara Center. The Sahara Center is a not-for-profit dedicated to advancing the socio-cultural dimension of sustainable development in Nigeria. And when we speak of socio-cultural, we refer to the individual and the culture, both of which come together to make up our communities and our societies. We are all about how to build better societies, the people component of the sustainable development equation. My name is Adun Okupe. Thank you for joining us. Conversations at Indigo is our monthly salon-style conversation series where big questions on various elements of life in Lagos and Nigeria are asked and answered to provide meaningful and stimulating engagement. This space is important to encourage curiosity, open-mindedness, and to teach people how to have meaningful discussions, ask deep questions, and share answers that can contribute to sense-making of the realities of life in Lagos and in Nigeria. We invite local and international practitioners and cultural researchers to lead the conversation. And joining us today is Lola Adefope. This podcast is a recording with the conversation leader following the main saloon discussion last Saturday to provide the opportunity for her to expand on the topic with reflections from some of the key questions that were asked during the conversation. Lola is the managing director of BTM Limited, a corporate travel management company with offices in Lagos, Angola, and Dubai. She is also an artist, a poet, and a radio presenter. She graduated with a BA in Fine Arts from the University of Reading, and her conversation topic was In Search of Luxury. Is it about quality or display? During this conversation, we looked at what luxury means as an evidence of socioeconomic progress, the middle class moving from necessities to demanding for more. Her conversation wove different aspects of luxury and how the meaning has evolved over time. Welcome to our conversation, Lola.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
You know, I'm just going to go back to how Saturday was. And I have to tell you that I was thinking to myself when we started, like, goodness, you know, after you'd shared the introduction, which I really appreciate how well researched it was, I was like, goodness, what are we going to talk about really on luxury for 2 hours? And then you took us on this journey that gave such amazing, detail and explanation and feedback. And I shared some of the messages that people had been sending to me about just how awesome it was. So thank you very much. So for the benefit of those that weren't part of this, last Saturday's discussion, can you share what luxury means to you?
Absolutely. And like I said, during the actual salon, when you asked me to discuss luxury, at first I was a bit taken aback because I don't really see myself as a luxury orientated person. I'm not really very brand orientated. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized why I have such a unique perspective on luxury per se. And it's definitely due to my background. It's definitely due to me being what my siblings and I refer to ourselves as cultural hybrids, our cultural hybridity, having a strong anchor in Nigerian culture through our family members, especially through my grandparents and my parents as well, but having been raised and educated in the UK from a very, very young age, and having to understand, balance, and navigate the nuances of British society. So for us, it was definitely a very steep learning curve being plucked out of Nigeria and dropped in the UK, but also understanding a different culture, understanding the different cultural perspectives, and understanding what gross material, what physical items they placed importance on, and then comparing that back to my Nigerian heritage. And I think that it gave me a unique perspective. And then now being back in Nigeria and looking at how modern Nigerian purchases are made, how the industry, the consumer industry operates in Nigeria, and how we're trying to elevate our own local brands, it gives a whole new view to how we view luxury and how I view luxury.
No, thank you for that. And I have to say, I feel like it's sometimes what we have in our own home, we don't appreciate it until we go outside and see other things and then come back and you realize, oh goodness, wow, this is what that meant. And I think it's that sense of appreciation. And yeah, so for me, when I think of luxury, I actually don't see it as tangible. I see it as that, that adherence to an elegance of living, that focus on living a quality life. But I don't know, if it's almost as though many people think of it as a consumption-led approach in terms of material. So you mentioned luxury brands. I know people were talking about luxury brands, different luxury brands, that Nigerians buy, Nigerian brands being luxury brands. How do you become a luxury brand, etc.? So let's peel it back down. What does it mean to be? What does luxury even mean? Is it the tangible? Is it the intangible? Or what can it
mean, luxury is actually both. It's both tangible items, physical items that people have decided are of value. Luxury items in the past used to be mostly niche items. They used to be items that were created by skilled personnel, artisans, people that actually took the time and the effort to put their energy into creating an item of beauty of quality and of worth. Luxury then was basically mostly a perspective. You used to have the haves and then the have-nots. You used to have people that could afford to use their surplus income to buy tokens that displayed their wealth. And those tokens were usually the most expensive items. And those expensive items were the items created by artisans. There were items created by generational skill workers. And by generational skill workers, what I mean are, for example, if you look at brands such as Louis Vuitton. Louis Vuitton, obviously everybody knows for the excellent leather work and handbags, the brand names, the logos, it's very easily recognizable. But it was actually a generational family business. They came from a family of artisans and tanners, and that information has been passed on from generation to generation to generation. They were then recognized in Europe, first of all, French society primarily, but then Europe as a whole for producing items of quality. And they were specialists in what they did. You didn't see Louis Vuitton also branching out into the florist business or into the watchmaking business. They were specifically leather good workers. And that same talent and that same quality of product, even though it's now mass produced, it's still elevated to that level of that status and that level. And when you look at luxury from that perspective, from it being a item of value and worth, a token that shows what elite society can afford, you then start to understand the perspective of luxury a little bit better as well. Because when you then look at the have-nots, it then becomes an item that is out of their reach. It becomes an item or a token that is a nice to have, not a necessity. And for them, in the Tudor days, in the days of society being a very, very small section of the general population, normal everyday people didn't even look at those items. Those items weren't accessible to them. So if you identify, or if you try and define luxury as an inaccessible item to the mass market, and it is only accessible to those that have the disposable income or that can afford it as a token, you then start to understand different perspectives of luxury. When you look at luxury, when you take it away from it being physical items, you then start looking at luxury from different perspectives. When you look at what the working class would identify as a luxurious, then you start looking at more abstract items such as time, the luxury of time, the ability to just not work, not go out and have to draw water, not go out and have to make money to feed your family, not living hand to mouth, just to be able to take the luxury of time and sit and do nothing. Then you start looking at luxury from an entirely different perspective. When you think of people that are literally living hand to mouth, that having the ability to have a servant is definitely a luxury item, is definitely a luxury allowance, because they are the servants, nobody serves them. So they don't necessarily have the same perspective over the word luxury as the rest, or the top 10%, shall we say, of society would do.
No, you're absolutely right. And a few things I draw on from what you said is that focus on specialization and that sense of pride in whatever it is that you're a specialist in. And I feel like it's that essence of peeling back and saying, what exactly am I trying to create here? What message am I trying to transfer here? How do I want to transfer this? How do I want to communicate this message to whom? And it's that you then expect that whoever is purchasing it from you, and this is the tangible, also appreciates that. Now, whether or not it's based on conspicuous consumption as a form of display or a form of quality, it's about, you know, how the maker, so to speak, sees things. And then I like what you also said about having this luxury of time. And I feel like that also helps us to, when we come to a developing economic context like Nigeria, as we shared on the conversation, we start to see that a lot of things that we take for granted, where even though you're wealthy, we take for granted the fact that basic necessities like electricity, healthcare, good roads, all of these things are seen as quote unquote luxurious things to aspire towards. And it's that question of how are we evolving as a society when we start to talk about our, GDP rising, we start to talk about how society is moving forward and what people are aspiring toward, because luxury has this aspirational element, as you shared with us. And I will ask you for that story again, because I found it quite fascinating about your grandma and your granddad, and is that aspirational? So what are people aspiring to as a community? Because I think in a way the elite communicates to us what we should aspire to. And it's that aspirational element that gives you something that, oh, once I get this, I will be like this, I would live like this, I would do this. But we all know that in our society now, there's that level of decay that's around us, that it doesn't really translate accordingly to how life is lived. So yeah, so that is something that really struck me. And I really like the story you gave us about your grandmother. So if you don't mind sharing that again, just about that sense of traveling and, coming back. And it's actually, again, if I tie it into your life, it's almost like you're still, you're still in travel. It's about that travel. Although now, instead of traveling for once a year, you travel, I don't know how many times a year you travel.
Well, now with COVID, not as often, I can tell you that. But previously, yes, and I definitely think that I got the need for adventure, the need to experience new cultures, and definitely that travel bug from both my grandparents. My grandfather on my mother's side was Chief Lawson, and my grandmother is still alive. Definitely very, very cherished, Chief Mrs. Io Ibidun Lawson. And she would tell me stories about when they would go overseas. My grandfather was very, very lucky, and I'm very, very lucky to have had the kind of upbringing and family background that I've had. But they were basically talking about what travel was like in those days. And if we're now taking this into a luxury perspective, we're then looking at the social trends of luxury and the social influences in those days that would actually promote luxury and define what luxury was. So in those days, when Nigerians would travel, you wouldn't travel by air. Air travel wasn't popular. It was mostly for military movements, the army, warfare, those sorts of things, or the movement of goods. It was very, very expensive, and it wasn't as safe as it is today, obviously. So when Nigerians did want to travel, they would take a ship. They would literally go down to Apapa Port and get on a ship. They would be on that ship for weeks at a time, getting to their destination, which of course was predominantly the UK. So they would sail across the UK and they would be there for an elongated period of time, months to years, before then coming back to Nigeria, taking that long ship journey to arrive back in Nigeria. But of course, whilst they were in the UK, Nigerians then were also very, very proud. We would go with our finest wear, and our finest wear in those days was our cloth. So you would see a lot of ashoke, you would see a lot of the family cloth being worn on these journeys. But when these people came back, yes, they would still be wearing our cloth. They would still be dressed traditionally in London, but they would also be wearing more westernized clothes, more European clothing as well. And they would come back with those tokens of wealth and experience and exploration. And in those days, Nigerian society didn't have TV, we didn't have radio, newspapers took forever for us to actually see fashion in print. So what they would look forward to would be these returnees coming back from Europe, coming back from the UK, and they would look at what they were wearing. They would look at who they had interacted with, who they had seen, what bags they were carrying, and fashion and the status of quality and luxury would then be applied to these new trends that are being brought back, literally imported into the country by society that had traveled. And the society that was now here would then absorb that information and absorb that luxury and those labels and then recognize them. That's when people now became familiar with Chanel, with houses and fashion houses such as Chanel. That's when specific scents became popular, because the people that had traveled had then brought it back to introduce to Nigerian society as a whole. Those items, of course, were even more precious and even more luxurious and even more of value because they were so inaccessible. And this comes back to the inaccessibility of these items and of these tokens, ascribing them even more status as luxury items and luxury brands. Because not everybody had access to them, the people that did have access to them, their status was elevated, and the items that they had access to were coveted by not just Nigerians, but by most of West Africa and everybody that they then interacted with. On the flip side, if you're looking at luxury from a historic perspective, I told you the story on Saturday about my father's father, my grandfather, Major General Henry Adefope. And he would, I mean, he loved his grandkids. He was just such a great person. We keep saying an officer and a gentleman, but he taught the boys in my family how to really be upstanding human beings. And then he taught the women in our family how difficult life was going to be for us as Black women moving around in the world. And his perspective on luxury was entirely different. He, very much like me, he was not label centric, but he had things of such value and of such quality. He used to have all of the grandkids in his study, and he used to tell us stories, and everybody else would go out and play, and I'd be there playing with his trinkets, playing with obviously unloaded historic guns and knives and so on and so forth. And one of his favorite items was his chair in his study, which was a handcrafted chair. And it was both leather, but it also was covered in ashoke as well. And he would tell me the story of the ashoke, where it came from, what it meant to our family, what to recognize in the ashoke. And of course it was a limited, I mean, now we can say it was a limited edition because they don't weave that particular print anymore. They don't use that exact dye anymore. In fact, you can't even find or match that exact dye because it was made from certain plants and dyes and flowers and so on and so forth, that combination just isn't really accessible, isn't available anymore. We can match it with synthetic dyes, but to create that exact same piece of ashoke is basically impossible. And those are the things that he had that were of value to him. And the workmanship that went into it, the workmanship that went into that chair and went into that ashoke that then became a part of that chair, I've never seen anything like it since. It was just purely beautiful, the knotwork, the stories. And if you go back to historic Nigerian culture and West African culture, we actually used to tell stories. We used to pass messages on through our cloth and through our weaving. And that history was embedded in that piece of material and in that beautiful chair that he used to use in his study. And he would tell me the story of some of the items that he had around his study, whether it was leather work or whether it was an ornate carved knife that he got from some sultan or the other in the north of Nigeria. And that item itself, just from the weight of it, it was brass, I believe, just from the weight of it, obviously would be an expensive item, obviously would be a luxury item. But from the history of that item and the fact that it was a gift from a person of note made it even more of a covetable and luxurious item because it was basically irreplaceable. So when you now look at luxury versus vintage versus modern luxury and items that are now covetable, you have an entire history of accessible and inaccessible items that is getting a little bit lost today. And with Nigerian culture at the moment, this is where I like to go into and say that we're living in the age of envy with social media, with Instagram, with being able to see what your neighbors have and compare it to what you don't have. It's definitely an age of envy we're living in. And it goes back to your comment about conspicuous consumption, especially amongst, and I know it's a little bit crass to say, but especially amongst the nouveau riche. You see a lot of people driving around in Lekki and zooming up and down the expressway in sports cars and wearing every single brand known to man. And then they're displaying that very ostentatiously to show that they have money. So they are now collecting these luxury items as a display or using them as tokens of entry into an elite sector of society. And they are also deliberately garnering people's envy. They want people to know that they have money. They want people to see that they can afford these things that were previously inaccessible to them and were previously only accessible to the rich or to the top 10% of society previously. And it's very, very different to how our forebearers and our forefathers and our grandparents reviewed luxury. For them, luxury wasn't necessarily a display of wealth. It wasn't necessarily used as token of items to oppress other people or make other people jealous. It was literally a byproduct of what they could afford, of their station in life, of how much they had traveled, of how much they were exposed to, and how much they had experienced. It was as a result of a life having been lived, instead of a token of a life to be lived.
Absolutely. And I think that it's quite interesting that you can see someone wearing like 5 different labels at the same time. And then when you think, you're like, do you actually understand that when you know, this is what Dolce & Gabbana stands for, this is what Chanel stands for, this is what, you know, it's that even that sense of understanding what the brand stands for and how you want to be identified with it. And when you then jumble everything together, it's just of confusion. No, I thank you for sharing the intergenerational dimension and perspective on luxury. I think it's good to see how things have evolved over time, how, you know, quality and accessibility was seen as something to aspire towards because it made sense. It was that you couldn't have easy access to it, just like how some foods are seen as, you know, very, very, very rare finds, or, you know, when we used to eat seasonal foods and we couldn't preserve, etc. So those were things that if you could get things out of season, you were seen as, oh wow, you had the luxury of being able to do that. Just going back to what you said, even about, you know, servants and people that provide services, you know, it's also that sense, I guess, which explains in a sympathetic way the novel rich, because it's that sense of, you know, you used to hustle before, you couldn't afford something before, now you can, you want to just display to everybody that now I have it. And I don't know if I can say it's misplaced, because I can understand it. It's almost like a call for attention. I don't agree with it, but it's that sense of a call for attention of I want to belong. It's just that you don't understand. I don't know. They don't realize that by doing that, you literally are showing how you really don't belong, you know, by doing
they
this.
don't necessarily understand the history of the quality. You see people, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just agreeing with you entirely. You see people drinking champagne by the bucket load, but they don't even understand the history behind champagne. I was in the south of France, and this lady was basically giggling at me because I had a glass of champagne after our meal. And she was turning around to say, actually, her grandmother actually had a winery and she created champagne. And she used to make champagne for the king. And champagne in those days was taken before the meal as an aperitif to cleanse the palate, and the bubbles would open up your taste buds. It wasn't a drink that you would have in celebration. And then when salon culture became popular, people then started drinking champagne to get drunk because the bubbles would get you drunk very quickly. And high society didn't have that much time, especially during wars and during raid and so on and so forth. So they would drink it to get drunk in salons. And then it became a party alcohol, a party beverage. But even then it was drunk in very, very small quantities. But just as you said, here in Nigeria, we drink it by the bucket load. We'll drink champagne, we'll mix it with cognac, we'll mix it with this and all sorts of things. And it loses a little bit of its sense of being special. It loses a little bit of its history, the way in which we consume it. And it's the same with labels. It's the same with fashion labels. You'll have someone wearing Chanel perfume with a Tommy Hilfiger sweater and Gucci shoes, and they don't understand the culture, the clash, and the fashion clash between the brands as to why they should be wearing this or why they shouldn't be wearing it. So yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly there.
Oh goodness, thank you so much. I just learned something new. So now champagne, salon culture. So when we start in September, champagne on you to help us in our conversation.
Absolutely, I will steal a bottle.
Or two, but just coming back to conversations and champagne, I feel like we need to do an episode on champagne, because I think when you go for Nigerian parties, you realize that we don't understand what champagne really means. And there's nothing wrong about making it our own. Is that I feel like that's it's almost that mishmash of, I want to show how wealthy I am so I can afford the most expensive drink for everybody, and therefore everybody should just drink it to stupor. Whereas it's that sense of being tasteful and moving from the vulgar, I would say, to just that sense of tastefulness. You go for a wedding and you have one glass of champagne and they're like, no, I have plenty, have more. And you're like,
Sorry, have more, enjoy, because we're very hospitable people. We want to entertain.
Okay, I'm just going back to the conversation because I remember one of the comments that was made in terms of just how luxury, and when you think of luxury, quote unquote, it's a war of the class. What do you remember this? Do you remember this statement? Yes.
Yes.
What would you say to that? For me, that was one thing that struck me, but I don't know if there was any other comment that really struck you in terms of the conversation that we had, and what was it? Let's just go back a little bit to the discussion.
No, absolutely. I remember when that comment popped up and I really hadn't looked at it in that way. And I was a little bit taken aback at first every time I see the word war, to be fair. But I do understand where the person that made the comment was coming from, because to be honest, it is a war on class. It is a war between the classes. I mean, in Nigeria, it's only over the past 10 years or so that we started to see the emergence of a middle class. But prior to that, we didn't. We literally had those that have and those that have not. And there was no in between. That is now being changed. And like I said, oh, sorry, excuse me. Apologies for that. That is now slowly changing. And like we had previously said before, it's definitely something that the nouveau riche in Nigeria are grabbing with both hands. They want to have that respectability. They want to have that recognition and that weight in society. And the only way for them to do that is the only way that they understand to do that is to display their wealth. So it's not even about the design or the structure of a house. It's just about the fact that they can afford to make that house big. It is a big house. Everybody come and see my wealth. Can I now be entered into society? Somebody had previously told me a story, and I'm not sure how true this is, about the creation of the yacht club. And it was basically created because somebody wasn't given access to the boat club because they weren't the right sort of person or not. Now, whether that story is true or not, it is it's a true reflection of Nigerian society as it was then. Those that now have want entrance into high society. They want to be respected. And that's why we have such a display of such ostentatious wealth, whether or not that wealth was come by honestly or not. The fact is they now have it, whether it was governmental obtained wealth or whether it was through trading or whether it was just through inheritance or hard work. The fact is they now have that wealth and they now feel that they belong in society and they belong to have the same accolades and recognition that people that have generational wealth actually do. And the type of luxury items that they purchase are very ostentatious. They're very conspicuous items as well. I know the family that runs Polo, the luxury brand, the luxury house in Nigeria, and the volume of high-end watches that they sell, the volume of high-end designer clothing that they sell, you wouldn't think that we had enough people in Nigerian society to actually cater to that volume, but we do. And they're given as gifts, not just as come and see what I have, come and see what I'm wearing, come and see what my family is wearing. They're given as gifts to impress other people as well, so that those people can raise them up in their esteem and say, okay, yes, this is definitely a big man. So gone are the days where Nigerian rich or Nigerian big men were recognized by the size of their agbada, like we discussed, or the size of their pot belly. It's now literally the size of their bank balance, but nobody's going to put their bank balance up on Instagram. No, they're literally just going to flash that Piaget watch. They're going to show you the latest Birkin bag that is on wait list for everybody for 7 months. Funny fact, by the way, Hermes set out a statement 2 years ago, basically letting them know that the Birkin bag, the wait list for the Birkin bag was 2 years long. And the top 5 people on the wait list, one was Russian, one was Chinese, I believe, and the remaining 3 were Nigerian.
Wow.
what does that say about us? It's just, we can now afford to, so we do. And the perspective of luxury, how we think about luxury, from us, just from an everyday person, and then how high society thinks about luxury, and then how the everyday working man thinks about luxury is so vast and so varied, that it's insane. And when you go back to this conversation about the war between the classes, the example I gave to you on Saturday was basically, if I took a brand new Chanel handbag to a random village in the middle of Plateau State and I gave it to a woman, she would just look at me and look at it, and it would be literally, it would be valueless to her. It would have no value. It would not be seen as a luxury item to her. What would be seen as luxury to her is if I had arrived with an entire lorry load full of bottled water, so she doesn't have to go and actually draw that water from the well. Everybody in that village will now be jealous of her for having immediate access to fresh, potable, bottled water. She would be the queen of her district. And that would be seen as true luxury, because not only are we saving her the effort of going down to the well or the river or wherever it is to draw water, bring it back to her house to sanitize and clean that water, and then drink it and use it for cooking and washing and so on and so forth. You have made it more convenient for her to access that clean water, which, to be fair, is life-saving for her family, but you're also giving her back that luxury of time, additional time to do something else that she definitely needs to do. So my designer handbag will probably be used or stripped down and turned into belts. She wouldn't care that it cost $15,000 or however much they cost, because it literally doesn't make sense to her. It's not a priority for her. It's not anything that is functional for her in her life. It's not a luxury good, but a truckload of water, that would be true luxury to her. So when you look at, or when you think about and consider the different perspectives of luxury, it does make sense that somebody would call this a war between the classes.
And I think that that's a very powerful thing to understand, because it's that sense of wanting to make your life easier. When you really boil down to it, wanting to make life easier for you, wanting to make life a bit more enjoyable, wanting to make life more comfortable, right? That's what luxury was originally or is supposed to be about. Even when you buy the Chanel, you know, she used to advertise as very well made, functional items, stylish items that were timeless pieces. And I remember we spoke about vintage and how, you know, one participant explained how vintage for him is the ultimate luxury because it has lasted the test of time and shows that it shows the craftsmanship that is within it. Now, I don't know how quickly or how long we're going to get to having a real vintage market in Lagos or some sort of vintage market. But do you think Nigerians will understand and appreciate and buy quality vintage items that do not necessarily scream out loud? And I'm sorry for putting you on the spot here, but I don't necessarily the label screaming out loud, because I do believe, and it's not only Nigeria, I think it's anywhere where you have a rising middle class. You know, we have conspicuous consumption. So, you know, Singapore, the Novo-Rich in Hong Kong, China, you know, they're all like that. Even in Europe, until now, where things have kind of, you know, developed economy, so the labels of wealth are different, and showing off is now showing how discreet you can be as opposed to how overt you can be. You see, those things have also changed. So back to my question is, do you think we are going to move to the era of vintage?
Well, that's a loaded question, Adu. Thank you. And the answer is yes and no. If you look at vintage, okay, let me tell you a story. Let's start with the story. That might be a little bit easier. I remember when I was younger, probably about 17, 18, we lived in Southwest London, and I would tell my mother that, oh, I'm going up to Camden, I'm going vintage shopping, and her face would fall. This woman would just be like, why do you want to wear somebody else's clothes? Do you even know who they are? Why do you want to go and buy old clothes? Oh, are you going to launder them first? Please don't bring it into my house, don't bring it into my house. And that was her perspective of the vintage market in London. Now, if I told her that I was going vintage shopping at Harvey Nichols instead of at Camden, and I was looking for Coco Chanel's old worn leather handcrafted coat, then her response would be different. Her response would most likely still be, why are you going to go and waste money on somebody else's old clothes? Why are you going to waste that much money on somebody else's old clothes instead of buying a new one? But her perspective of vintage then wasn't really one coming from, she wasn't impressed, let's just be honest. However, when she shows me pictures of her from her youth, and pictures of her and her sisters and their fashion and their clothes. It was this gorgeous white lace top. And I'd ask her, where are these clothes? Don't you know that this is vintage? This would be vintage to me now. I would love to have that jacket. I would love to have that watch. I would love to have that top. And she's like, oh, it's in a trunk somewhere in London at one of my friends' houses and so on and so forth. She didn't really think about keeping those items for her children moving forward. I mean, she was in her 20s then, so she hadn't even imagined that I was going to exist. But from that perspective, she will now hold credence to vintage. And there's a lot of stuff that my grandmother has that she gives them to my mom. Her jewelry, like unique select pieces, and she has stories around those items. Now, if it is generational items, if it is items that have a history attached to them, then I believe that Nigerians will take value of vintage and they will see the value in a vintage market. For example, if you gave me MKO Abiola's leather-bound notebook that he used to make notes in as a vintage item, I would cherish that. I would definitely honor it. But if you just gave me somebody's old leather book that they had been writing in 1920s, I just wouldn't be interested at all. So I think for Nigerians especially, the context of vintage also has to be married to the context of luxury. It has to be an excellently crafted item. And it also has to be married to the concept of history. It needs to be an item that has some sort of accessible history that people can then identify with. Because vintage in Europe and in America doesn't necessarily have to have that connotation of history tied to it for it to be of value, for it to be valued. But in Nigeria, because of the perspectives that we have, it definitely needs to have additional weight to justify why you're interested in an old quote unquote item. So there is the possibility for that market to develop here, but it won't develop anytime soon, and it won't develop before Nigeria has actually created and sold globally our own levels of quality, our own quality brands. And I think that with the fashion houses, with people like Chimamanda Adichie pushing brands like TNL and Itu Mbasi and The Lady Maker, with people like Michelle Obama wearing Maki O's clothes and so on and so forth, we are developing globally brand and luxury brands that can then be recognized. After those brands have been created and Nigeria becomes recognized as a source of luxury and a source of quality items, those items can then add weight to the development of a vintage society, or at least a society that places more value in vintage.
I completely agree with you in the sense that I think that it's the story, right? It's the storytelling behind the product, behind the item. That's really what draws it in, and that's what draws one in. And also that sense of this was part of our living history, or part of our history if the person is no longer alive, and is that connection to the past that can be very powerful. Okay, well, this brings me to the end of our conversation. A bit abruptly, I might add. So I would want to just ask.
Enjoying this conversation all over again.
I know, right? I was like, how are we done? How many minutes? This was meant to be so short. But I want to ask my final question, which is basically that, for those that don't have a lot of cash, but want to live a life of quality, want to live a life of elegance, what would you say are the fundamentals towards luxurious living in Nigeria?
Oh, that's a tough one. That is not an easy question to end in, Adam. So thank you very much. Well, I would say that a lot of people should take stock of their life and take stock of what is important to them. Is it something that's a material good? So do you want to save up and purchase an item that you can then pass down through generations? And if you remember, one of the things that we said earlier, that's one of the key reasons that luxury items were actually purchased in the first place. It was key tokens and items that, especially jewelry for women, that was then passed down from mother to daughter, and it was gifted as part of dowries and as part of the history of the family. So if somebody in Nigeria now wanted to invest in luxury, I would say take stock of what is important to you. If it's family that's important to you, do you want to purchase an item that can then be passed on to them? And also, again, it depends on what end of the spectrum of society and what end of that wealth spectrum people sit on, because a lot of Nigerians would view access to decent roads, access to healthcare as a luxury. Is that what is important to them? First of all, I actually don't believe that healthcare should be a luxury. I think it should be accessible to absolutely everybody, but that's a conversation for another time. But again, for some people, that would be their priority, and that would be something that is inaccessible to them, and it's a luxury good, it's a luxury item. So is that something that they now want to save and invest in, having access to decent healthcare? There are other items that could be hoarded as luxury items if people have enough disposable income. But one of the key things that my father has always said to me is, if you don't work for it, you won't value it. And also, if there's no history behind it, you may not value it. So for me, items of luxury are items that have history or items that are beautifully crafted. So anybody looking to invest in a luxury item, they should definitely look at the quality, the time that went into creating that item. Why is that item labeled as luxury? Is it just because it is a popular brand? Is it just because somebody else on Instagram was wearing it? Or is it because the person that produced it is literally a master of their craft, and that is an item that they personally identify with? Don't just buy it because it's bright and shiny. Buy it because it elicits an emotional response within you. So even if other people don't see the value in that item, you do. And you understand why it is an item of luxury and an item of quality. Does that answer your question, Ish?
Oh, yes, completely. Thank you very much. And I think I would also just add that it's that fine if you can research the person, the maker for items. You know, it's always good to even connect with them, get to know them, get to understand the story. It really just brings the item or the piece to life. And the other ways are, you know, in terms of, so if I'm answering my own question, is in terms of luxurious living, is decide on the key things that make you happy and try to buy the best quality that you can afford. So there's a book I read many years ago when I was still a very poor student, which was Orchids on Your Budget. And it's basically, you know, how you can afford, obviously not necessarily orchids, but afford, you know, good quality on your budget. And I keep sharing it with friends, especially younger friends, so that it's not about getting into debt or getting into this sense of you're struggling, but knowing that wherever you are in life, whatever station you are in life, trying to do the best, not necessarily about overly consuming too much, but really taking time to have select special pieces, kind of what you said, select special pieces that are meaningful, that will also last, you know. Yeah, and it's a good way to live life.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate what you've literally just said, it's not about overconsumption, and it's not about bankrupting yourself to display what you have. It's about being selective and about just filling your life with beauty. And if you look at it from that perspective, that you want to fill your life with beauty, or you actually just want to have something beautiful in your life, it'll change the way you view luxury items and you purchase them.
No, thank you so much, Lola. This has been so much fun. So what happens next is, well, this is going to be on a podcast. We'll get a link to we'll put a link to your at Alala Flow, and then we'll also put a link to BTM Limited, in terms of just so that people can also know what you do and know more about how to connect with you. And yeah, thank you so much for leading the conversation. We're going to be calling you again, not now, next year, when we talk about
happily. And I'm going to be getting into all your conversations.
What was it that was the topic that they appointed to you? Yes, the one on arts. Yes.
Yes. That conversation, I think you should schedule at least 3 hours for.
I know, right? I feel like that one's going to be a lot. So that'll be next year, maybe February. Yeah, next year. Cool. All right, my dear. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's definitely been an interesting topic, and I'm definitely going to be raiding my grandmother's closets more often. So thanks for the ideas.
Cool. All right. Bye. Lola,
Bye. Take care.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, darling. Bye.
Bye, then.